G'day battlers, and today we're going to be talking about the Love Cup that is coming to the Go Battle League today, actually, from February 4th through February 18th, the first week alongside Ultra League and then alongside Master League. And that is the big one because it is going to have 4 times Stardust rewards. Definitely the time to grind if you want a little bit of extra dust. But what is the Love Cup? It's a bit of a complicated one in that it isn't based on typings. Instead, it is a Great League Cup where red and pink Pokemon are eligible. So it's a bit hard to conceptualize what that means. So we're just going to jump straight into it today and take a look at what the meta is probably going to shape out and look like. But if these meta guides are useful to you and you want them to show up in your YouTube feed, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because most of you haven't. I would really appreciate it. And these guides are going to keep coming as the Go Battle League keeps going on with some brand new and sort of returning cups. But with that said, let's jump into it. And of course, we've got to start off with our thumbnail shot. So perfect. Now we've got our main graphic with 5 groups on it, obviously in the shape of a heart, and we've got some core breakers down below us as well. And I need to emphasize that these are actually really good Pokemon. Like some of them are very highly ranked in PV Poke. I'll talk about them more towards the end of the video though, but just know that they're not down there because they're worse than the Pokemon over here. Some of them are going to be absolutely everywhere in the Love Cup, but I'll talk about those ones towards the end of the video. First off, let's take a look at the heart of the heart graphic. We've got these sort of anti-fire users, and so we have rollout users in terms of Licky Licky and also Miltank. We've also got water types in here, Alomomola, Bruxish, and Corsola, the regular form here. So if you've got a lot of XL sort of left over somehow, then you can have a Corsola, or if you've already got one built like me, otherwise, there are going to be some other options for you. But if we sort of follow the heart along, sort of towards me, we've got the fire types. A lot of Incinerate users in Talonflame, Skeledirge, Macargo. Turtonator is also hiding back there. And then actually a Karate Chop user in Magmar. Generally, Shadow Magmar is actually going to be the one you want to go for if you are a Magmar enjoyer, but I'll come back around. If we keep following the heart, we've got the Fairy types in the bottom right-hand corner. Wigglytuff is running Charm, while Clefable is actually going to be running Fairy Wind. And also running Swift as sort of its big damaging move in a lot of cases in this meta. Following the heart along, in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a bit of a blast from the past here in the fighters, Medicham and Scrafty. Not 2 Pokemon that you see very often, but 2 Pokemon that are going to be relatively useful in this meta. And then in the top left-hand corner, all by itself, we have Hisuian Electrode, who really, there's not a lot of other Pokemon in this meta that do what Hisuian Electrode does, being that sort of grass and electric typing, and sort of managing to get into the meta, where a lot of other electric types haven't necessarily. But let's start breaking it down, starting off with that group in the middle. Obviously, they beat the fire types. That is their main role. You've got a lot of super effective rock damage running around and a lot of super effective water damage. This is a very fast move heavy cup. It always is. So big rollout damage, big water damage. Corsola, as much as it's sort of a bit of an off meta pick, it's actually going to be quite strong. It only takes 4 bubbles to get to its rock blasts. And so they're really going to add up quite a bit. And unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of coverage against the rest of the meta, so I think more people are going to be leaning towards the very, very, very bulky Alomomola. It is really going to be quite the meta destroyer, I think, in a lot of ways, and so I think that's going to be the top pick. Of course, Licky Licky and Miltank are going to be good as well. Miltank, I would actually argue, is a little bit better in some senses than Licky Licky. Well, it depends what your team needs. So Miltank is really good against the water types, like a Alomomola, because you have access to Thunderbolt, so you are going to have that ability to get super effective damage to get the waters while also countering the fires with your rollout damage. Licky Licky, on the other hand, has a much better time against the fires. Like, it really locks them down because you do have access to that earthquake that can really shut them down. Obviously not as good into Talonflame, but you're still doing rollout damage, which is going to destroy Talonflame to say the least. So still a really, really solid position to be in, and it really just depends what your team is sort of lacking in coverage. They are probably, for the most part, going to lose to the fairies. Also, generally going to lose to the fighters. Now, obviously, that's the normal types, losing a little bit more than the waters. But Corsola, with its rock typing, doesn't love the fighters. And Bruxish and Alomomola generally kind of lose those as well, although there is some ability to play back, especially with a bit of shield or energy advantage going on. Hisuian Electrode generally going to beat them up as well. Really going to beat up the water types. Not as bad into the rollout users, but you know, it's still generally Electrode has a lot of damage to throw out there with its ability to get wild charges. So let's talk about the fire types now. Again, they're going to lose to the anti-fires. That's their job. They're pretty good up against the fairies, although admittedly there are a few cases where the fairies can get some wins. Notably, Clefable is actually able to get some wins against Macargo and also against Magmar, I believe. Actually, I think Wigglytuff can get that Magmar matchup as well. Doesn't care a whole lot about that Karate Chop damage. The fires, there's no arrow between them, but Electrode is a bit of a back and forth scenario where Electrode has some good matchups, some bad matchups. Talonflame is actually one that Electrode can win in some shield scenarios, and this really exemplifies the sort of Hisuian Electrode fire thing, because it has the grass type, so it loses to a lot of them, but something like Talonflame, you do win the one shield straight swift. You don't even need to land a wild charge, but Talonflame can opt to go for the 2 shield matchup, in which it will just be able to incinerate you all the way down. So it's a bit of back and forth, and there's quite a lot of back and forth between those matchups, because if you land a wild charge somewhere, all of a sudden you're in a much better spot than you would have been otherwise. But it goes the other way as well. Knife cuts both ways. So something to think about. And then we've also got the fighters as well, who it really depends on the fire type's subtyping or what its other role is. So for example, Talonflame, because it is a flyer, really good time up against the fighters. Something like Macargo, because it has the rock typing, not so hot into the fighters by comparison. So it's a bit of a choose your poison a little bit. And of course, something like Scrafty, because it has dark type damage, is going to be a lot better into Skeledirge than Metacham will be, because it doesn't have that same super effective damage. And we'll talk about movesets for the fighters coming up as well. Fairies, Clefable is definitely better than Wigglytuff in a lot of ways in this cup, even though you are running Fairy Wind instead of Charm, so you're a little bit more on the charge move side of things, as opposed to the fast move pressure that you see through the rest of this cup. I do think that Clefable has a lot of sort of choice matchups that it can sort of pick up where Wigglytuff doesn't do as well. So I'd really push you towards that Clefable, because it does get to those Swifts so swiftly. I guess that's the point of the move, and so it is a pretty powerful pick. They lose to the Fires, generally beat the anti-Fires, going to beat the Fighters pretty handily as well. And then Electrode is one example where Clefable has a really good time up against that Electrode. Wigglytuff, not as good of a matchup. Fighters beat the normals, generally beat the waters. We've talked about the fire types, lose to the fairies, and they're generally going to lose to that Hisuian Electrode as well, really because they don't have a lot to hit it with. I am going to recommend that you run Ice Punch on Metacham, which does sort of give you that ability to hit Hisuian Electrode. As far as the second move, it's a little bit, you can sort of choose. I would recommend something either Power Up Punch or Dynamic Punch. Dynamic Punch might be the play, so you can try and get some, cheeky KOs through, but you can really go either way, whichever one fits your playstyle a little bit better. Scrafty, a bit more stock standard foul play. You could run Acid Spray if you really wanted to. It could be a little bit sneaky, but again, it's going to be up to you how you want to run your fighters. So in Electrode, we've talked about all the matchups. We beat the anti-fires. The fires are a bit back and forth. The fairies, you lose to Clefable, but Wigglytuff you can win. And then the fighters, you end up winning as well. So let's talk about the core breakers. Galarian Slowbro is very high on the PvPoke rankings. It's a very good Pokemon. Not only do you have really good matchups into things like, Hisuian Electrode, but you also have access to Surf. So you're doing a really good job up against the fire types. And you also do have access to Brutal Swing, which doesn't necessarily give you superior type coverage into most of the meta, but it does give you some spammy ability to hit Pokemon that would otherwise resist that water damage. So Bruxish is just a domination in that you can really get those big super effective damage through, but even like Alola Mola, you still get that ability to do some really good neutral damage, and so Galarian Slowbro is going to be a really big pick. Next to a Druddigon? I feel like it's Druddigon, and then Milotic, who have that Dragon type damage. Dragon type damage is neutral across the board unless you're up against those fairies, and so it is going to be another really powerful sort of way to really break up people's teams, especially if you sort of want to deploy your shields in particular ways to really just give that big Dragon tail damage some really heavy power, I suppose. We've then got Seeking, who's a bit of a different water type, where you do have access to Icy Wind and Drill Run, so obviously you're still going to have a good time up against the fires because you have that super effective Drill Run. Icy Wind gives you a bit of more interesting coverage though, and does help you hit back against those Hisuian Electrodes. You have to be a little bit scared, obviously, still. And then we've got Ariados, who's kind of here as another anti-water option, someone that can sort of fill a little bit of Electrode's shoes in some ways, but obviously you're not going to have as good of a time into the rollout users, and the fire types are really devastating, which is it's a bit of a high risk, high reward, in which you're also going to have a really good time into the fairies, a really good time into the grasses, really good time into the fighters as well, but some really bad matchups. So it's a bit of an RPS mon in some ways, but I think there's a lot of energy advantage that can sort of
make sure that it's not actually that RPS. Maybe if someone low skilled would use it, it would be a little bit more RPS, but it's see how you go with it. And I've put Lickitung in here. Lickitung sort of used to be obviously OP in PvP, and now it's a little bit less so, but it is still going to be quite decent in this cup. I feel like it was in the top 20 on PvPoke. I wouldn't recommend it as a first port of call, but if you're just looking for some bulk to shore up your team, you don't want to go with something like Chansey Blissey strat, then I think Lickitung could potentially have some viability, even though it has been nerfed since times past. But, there's other picks that are eligible in this meta as well that I haven't talked about today. Definitely recommend checking out PvPoke, checking out some content creator teams, see what really speaks to you. And yeah, of course, subscribe if you haven't already for future meta guides. And thank you to my patrons and YouTube members as well for supporting the channel and this sort of content. But with that said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, especially that subscribe one, and I will see you in the next one whenever that may be. So, bye.